Well, first of all, I just want to thank you so much, Professor Shane, for being here and engaging with us as we honor and celebrate Heritage Month. And we're excited to hear about your story, your journey, and thank you again.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's get started. Could you please tell us about your background and how you identify?
Yeah, so I am Asian American. I'm Korean American, and my parents were both trained as doctors in South Korea. So they immigrated here to America to do their medical residencies. And so I'm actually an immigrant. I came with my parents at the age of 4 years old, and have lived in America ever since. I grew up in Ohio and then moved to the East Coast for school.
And there's no denying that identity impacts one's professional life. How have aspects of your identity impacted your career?
So I mean, I think my growth story is somewhat unique in the sense that, you know, I see it as in some ways the other way around. I feel that my career has, in a lot of ways, helped me appreciate and draw out my identity. And, you know, part of that is that I grew up as a child at a time and in a household in Ohio, which is where I grew up, where really assimilation was emphasized over preserving cultural identity. So, you know, the concern that my parents had living in Ohio, where there weren't a lot of Asians, you know, in our community, the concern was making sure that we all fit in and blended in and were seen as part of the community. So, you know, in our household, we were kind of encouraged not to speak Korean and to speak English only to our parents. So they would speak Korean to us, but we were encouraged to speak English back to them. And so over time, I think they succeeded in their goal of really assimilating us into the culture. But there was, for a period of time, kind of a loss of identity, a loss of sense of kind of you know, taking pride in our Korean heritage, and maybe in some ways hiding that. And it wasn't until much later in my career that I came to appreciate my Korean American identity. And it was really a slow, gradual process of personal growth. You know, through college, you know, I had a semester where I went back to Korea to study the language, and for the first time, you know, met a whole lot of Asian Americans who were similarly situated, and we talked about our experiences, and you know, came to kind of understand that there were a lot of people like me with similar kind of tensions and resolving our identities, and that was really helpful. And then of course, going to law school, becoming a law professor, and a dean, you know, students, once you're there as a Korean American faculty member, students who are similar or have similar backgrounds, you know, kind of take an interest in you. And it was real, it kind of, you know, I was taken aback a little bit at first, but then I really came to understand that they were, you know, they were really proud of me, for me, you know, proud to have someone with a similar background in the position that I was. So due to students taking an interest in me and my story, academic professional organizations, scholarly conversations that were happening around Asian American identity, conferences, all of that really drew me out of kind of the assimilated shell that I had been in, and made me realize that my Korean American heritage was a really important part of me. You know, finally, I would say, this is not anything to do with my professional life, but I married a woman with a different background. So my daughter is of mixed race, and she really took an interest in my family's, the Korean side of the family's heritage and culture, and that also really kind of reinforced for me the importance of taking ownership of that part of my identity and really understanding the role of that part of my background in my own identity and the importance of that in our family.
Appreciate you sharing that. My next question for you is just picking up from where you just stopped in terms of how has your racial and cultural identity encouraged and empowered you in your line of work? And I think you just started talking about that in your relationship with the students as well.
Yes, yeah, and I feel that again, it's been a process of really kind of understanding the role and some of the responsibilities that I have. But I do feel that my identity as an Asian American professor and leader contributes to a feeling that I have a unique voice, that my position kind of has meaning to members of the Asian American community here at Suffolk and in the broader community. And it gives me, I think, a heightened sense of pride about being where I am and about what I've accomplished. And my identity now, I think, helps me feel like I'm making a difference by just carrying out my job in teaching and participating in the leadership of the school.
Absolutely. Your scholarship focuses on discrimination or anti-discrimination within the context of diversity and equity in law. Does this carry additional significance based on your heritage?
I think it does, certainly to readers of the scholarship. And, when I'm speaking about my work at conferences to audiences, I think people appreciate my identity, and that gives a certain framework for readers and audiences to understand my work. But for myself, my interest in this area grew out of a broader and I guess more general interest in moral and political philosophy in grad school. After law school, I went to grad school for a PhD in philosophy, but I didn't go into philosophy with an interest in discrimination theory or anti-discrimination law or anything like that, really. My interest going in was really in moral and political philosophy, as I said, and then I grew to have an interest in equality and discrimination concepts. But I will say that my interest was primarily intellectual and scholarly, not at all based on personal position or any experience of discrimination that certainly I can remember. And the fact of the matter is that I feel extremely privileged, and I don't feel that I've ever been overtly discriminated against. So it's complicated. I mean, maybe there's a deep-rooted psychological reason why I'm interested in discrimination and equality, but mainly I write about discrimination theory and equality and diversity with some sense that I have a unique perspective, but also very conscious that I have experienced quite a lot of privilege in my own personal life. As I said, I grew up, both of my parents were doctors, and we were very well off financially. So in that sense, economically privileged. Went to the best schools, had an amazing education. So in a lot of ways, I have not experienced in any overt ways discrimination that would have impeded my my professional growth. So as I said, it's complicated. I do think that my identity does affect my scholarship in the way it's received and probably in the way that I go about it. Um, but it's not rooted in my personal experience of discrimination.
Thank you. Can you describe your biggest success story in your career today?
I probably I would cite going to law school, going to the law school that I wanted, and then transitioning from that to a big law firm career, and then landing a job as a law professor and succeeding in that role, really beyond my wildest dreams. And it's something that I'd never have seen myself doing in my more formative years in college and even law school. It was, the decision to go to law school was a big step for me because, all throughout college, I had been pre-med. Both of my parents were doctors. That was kind of a very known path for Asian Americans. At the time I went to law school, there was a growing number of Asians making that same decision, but there were still not that many Asian law students nationally, certainly not as many as there are now. So it was, putting myself out there a little bit in ways that felt scary at the time. And my success story is being able to succeed in that field.
I appreciate that. Saying that, you made a slight change from pre-med to becoming a law professor. Who or what was most helpful in your professional success?
I think it was the mentorship and advice and encouragement of professors in college. And then, the partners and senior associates that I was working for in the law firm after law school, that kind of made the biggest difference in my own understanding of what I could contribute and where my strengths were. In college, although I was a pre-med, I majored in philosophy. So back then I never realized that would become part of my career. I was really doing it as a strategy to get into med school because we were told that if you have a major in the humanities, that can sometimes make you stand out in a crowded field of pre-meds. But as I took more and more philosophy courses, my professors, kept telling me that I had unique insights and, kind of a talent or a knack for philosophical thinking, that carried over into law school, where I had a couple of student colleagues, as well as professors who were praising me for my work, and then in the law firm as well. It was just it was just constant encouragement along the way from people that I respected, that gave me the confidence to kind of keep going and to ultimately choose the path that I stuck with.
So, staying on the topic of mentorship, what is effective mentorship and how does one go about finding a great mentor?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. Mentorship is so important, and it was certainly important for me in my own professional development. But I would say that mentorship is not something that I sought out to find. I didn't go out there trying to pick a mentor or anything like that. The mentorship grew organically from working relationships that I had. And in some ways, my mentor found me and not the other way around. My most important mentorship grew out of a coworker relationship that I had. Somebody that I did a judicial clerkship with. So we were really peers at one time. and we worked together on cases and really got to know each other well, both personally and intellectually. So after that experience, my friend went into he went directly into an academic career and became a very successful law professor, while I went to a law firm and kind of was going down that path. And it was, once my friend was in this very successful academic position, he started to reach out to me, or we had continued to be in touch, but he really kind of started to put thoughts into my head about, hey, maybe you should think about being a law professor. And he knew me. He knew kind of what I liked to do. He knew what I was good at. And so again, it was this constant encouragement, this constant, what became a voice in my head, kind of spurring me along and telling me that I could do it, and that this would be a fruitful path for me to follow. And so, I do consider that to be a form of mentoring, even though we were kind of very lateral in terms of seniority. So, we're very similar in age, but so the way that I found mentorship was through friendship.
Sometimes I think, we don't talk about the importance of peer mentorship enough. People think sometimes, your peer always has to be older or more experienced. But I think, peer mentorship is just as effective. And reverse mentorship as well can be just as important from someone younger with lesser experience. So I appreciate you sharing that. So we've talked about your success in your field. We've talked about mentorship. Are there any challenges or setbacks that you've experienced in your career? And if there were, how were you able to bounce back, and how were you able to move forward?
So I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a setback, but there was a period of time in my professional development where I felt I was at a standstill, and I really was uncertain about whether I wanted to continue in that path. And that was when I was at the large law firm. So I was in a position where I felt really appreciated. I felt that the firm valued me, but at the same time, I mean, maybe there was some subtle stereotyping going on in terms of how I was being guided, and the types of work that I was being given, which was very challenging and intellectually satisfying. But I could see that it was a little different from the types of work that maybe some of my colleagues were getting. But ultimately, I just it wasn't work that I saw myself being able to continue for the entirety of my career. But I kind of felt stuck there. It was a very lucrative job. I was being told, that I had what it took to become a partner, and but it was very draining, and I felt like I ultimately I just wondered whether I could thrive in that position. And so, there was a period of time where I felt really uncertain about what was going to happen, and I wasn't particularly happy during that time. But through a process of really understanding myself with the support of my family, I did end up making the decision to leave and to pursue a career in academia. And it was through the support of my family, through that mentorship that I described, that I was able to make that decision, and ended up where I am now.
We're glad you're here. Well, my last question for you is, if you could go back and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I would tell my younger self to be authentic, I would tell my younger self not to worry so much about blending in and fitting in. I would tell my younger self to find ways to take pride in standing out. And that, because that ultimately is what is going to be most satisfying to you. That is what ultimately is going to help you feel like that you're doing something important in your life.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time, Professor Shane, and thank you for contributing to this conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure that folks will also appreciate our conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.